Welcome to The Explainer. When we think about a business, we usually picture the people, right? The employees, the managers, the executives. But an organization isn't just a group of people. At its absolute core, it is a complex, living hierarchy of decision-making. Today, we're going to unpack exactly how those strategic choices are structured in the larger context of strategic management to actually drive a company forward.
Okay, let's dive right into this because it is a fantastic question. We tend to assume that strategy is, something locked away in a top-floor boardroom, reserved solely for the CEO and the board of directors. But the reality? Strategy actually permeates every single level of a company, literally, from the executive suite all the way down to the front lines.
To really grasp how this works, we first need to define what we're actually talking about here. Strategic management is, essentially, a continuous stream of decisions and actions dealing with the long-run future of an entire organization. The whole goal is to create and then sustain a competitive advantage. Think of it as a forward-looking roadmap. It takes into account both internal and external factors to help an organization actually realize its ultimate vision.
So, here's our blueprint for today's explainer. We'll look at the strategic hierarchy, then corporate strategy, business strategy, functional strategy, centralized versus decentralized decisions, and finally, aligning the strategic plan.
First up, the strategic hierarchy. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it breaks down the sheer complexity of a massive corporation into three highly digestible tiers. It uses the cognitive ease of the rule of threes perfectly here. At the very top, we've got corporate-level strategy. Directly beneath that is business-level strategy. And branching out of the foundation is functional-level strategy. Literally everything an organization does fits somewhere into this cascading structure.
Moving right along to Section 2, Corporate, Where to Play.
Let's start our journey at the very top of this hierarchy. At this highest tier, the traditional domain of the CEO and the board, the overarching goal is to answer one fundamental question. What businesses or industries should the firm actually compete in? Corporate-level strategy is all about establishing the overall direction and scope of the entire organization. It's about managing a broad portfolio of various businesses and deciding the grand vector for the company's future growth.
To ground this in reality, let's look at McDonald's. So, because their core business is fast food retail, expanding into a huge new geographic market like China, that's a major corporate move. But if the CEO and senior executives suddenly decided to enter a completely new line of business, let's say manufacturing kitchen equipment, that represents a massive diversification strategy. Those giant where-to-play choices are exclusively corporate-level decisions.
Which brings us to Level 2, Section 3, Business, How to Compete.
Zooming down from the 30,000-foot view to middle management, often called the Strategic Business Unit, or SBU, things shift. Corporate might decide where to play, but the business level has to answer, how do we actually compete successfully within that chosen market? Corporate has the grand vision, right? But it's the business-level strategy that dictates exactly how the company is going to out-innovate and beat the incumbents in a specific industry. The focus at this middle tier is highly tactical. Business-level strategies are all about achieving a sustained competitive advantage. Managers here literally have to predict and manage competitive interactions, basically anticipating what their rivals are going to do and formulate distinctive competencies to outmaneuver them. Ultimately, it comes down to positioning the firm to satisfy specific customer needs way better than anyone else in that single industry.
Let's move to the next level and see how this builds into Section 4, Functional, Executing the Vision.
Down on the ground floor, the functional level outlines the day-to-day operations and resource allocations needed to actually support those higher-level strategies. Just look at the sheer breadth of these departments: R&D, marketing, finance, operations, human resources. These are the functional heads who craft very specific action plans to strengthen the capabilities of the business unit. They're the ones taking the abstract strategy and turning it into daily reality.
There is an incredibly powerful idea to remember here. The source notes, probably the most crucial level of strategy is the functional strategy level. This is because without functional strategies, individual organization can quickly lose traction and get stuck while competition moves forward. That hits the nail on the head. It perfectly highlights that without the functional workers grinding it out on the ground, the brilliant plans of the CEO remain completely paralyzed on paper. No execution, no strategy. Section 5, Centralized versus Decentralized Decisions.
So now that we've mapped the hierarchy, a big question pops up. Who actually gets the power to make these choices? Well, organizations typically deploy one of two structural extremes. First, you have centralization. This simply means the power to make decisions is kept strictly at the top levels of the organization. Decentralization, on the flip side, means decision-making authority is intentionally pushed down to the lower functional and operating levels. Side by side, we can objectively weigh the pros and cons of these top-down versus bottom-up approaches. A centralized approach allows for really high coordination and leverages top-level expertise, but it can suffer from a slow, sluggish, bureaucratic response to market changes, and honestly can be pretty demotivating for lower-level employees. Conversely, a decentralized approach permits rapid responses to external changes, empowers frontline workers, and takes the burden off top managers. But if you don't manage it carefully, it risks poor coordination across the company. It is a really delicate balancing act.
And that brings us to Section 6, aligning the strategic plan.
This is our final and maybe most critical phase. Think of strategy like a set of nesting dolls. As a general rule, strategy making starts at the corporate top. It then proceeds downward to the business level, and finally translates perfectly into associated functional operating actions. The lower-level plans absolutely have to fit flawlessly inside the higher-level strategies. If they don't, the organization is really just a collection of individuals carrying out completely disjointed tasks.
And this brilliantly illustrates what it takes to actually align all those moving parts. You're looking at the McKinsey 7S framework. It shows that for a strategy to be implemented successfully, all of these internal elements, strategy, structure, systems, shared values, style, staff, and skills, must point in the exact same direction. If your corporate strategy is pushing one way, but your functional systems and staff culture are pulling another, implementation is going to fail. Perfect alignment is the only way to avoid those implementation pitfalls.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Think about your own workplace for a second. Where does your daily work actually fit in your organization's hierarchy of choice? Are you executing functional tactics, designing business-level competitive moves, or maybe shaping the corporate portfolio? Understanding where you stand is the first step to truly maximizing your impact. Thanks for learning with me today, and keep exploring the incredible strategies that shape our world.